Welcome. I'm Randy Osborne. You're listening to the Bible Science for Kids podcast from a uniquely young earth, biblical creationist perspective. This is Cycle 2, Lesson number 9, The Sun. But before we start today's lesson, let's do a quick review of our last lesson. Do you remember what are some aquatic biomes? The first one is still, shallow, fresh water, like Gennesaret, also known as Tiberias, ponds and lakes. The second one is moving, shallow, fresh water, like the Jordan where Naaman was healed, streams and rivers. The third one is like a swamp or Behemoth's marsh in Job chapter 40. Wetlands and estuaries. The fourth one is like the salt water Moses crossed in Exodus 14. Oceans and seas. Who's proud of you? I am. Good job. Now for Cycle 2, Lesson number 9, The Sun. When I was a boy, there was a scientist named Isaac Asimov who had a television show about astronomy. He was obviously impressed by the things God had made on day 4 of Creation Week, the sun, the moon, and the stars. But he was proud to be an atheist. He insisted that there was no creator of the creation. In fact, I even heard him say that if people want to worship something, why not just worship the sun, since it is the source of energy for our life on earth. But that would be foolish idolatry, worshiping and serving the creation over the Creator. Several ancient civilizations of people did just that, worship the sun. Ancient Aztecs, Egyptians, Inca, ancient Japanese, Mesopotamians, ancient Persians and Romans all worshiped the sun. How foolish. Remember the faithful children of Judah named Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? They were captured and taken to Babylon, had their names changed, and were commanded to worship idols. But they refused to serve or worship false gods. What a good example. Listen to what God says to us in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19 of the New Century Version. When you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly bodies, don't be tempted to worship and serve them. The Lord your God has given them to all people everywhere. Question: what are some parts of the sun? Answer: some parts of the sun are core, radiative zone, sunspots, photosphere, solar flare, and corona. First, the core, the sun's powerhouse. At the center of the sun is the core, the region where the sun's energy is released. It's about 86,000 miles wide, and it makes up about 25% of the sun's radius. Temperatures in the core reach about 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. Here, nuclear fusion takes place, a process where hydrogen atoms are squeezed together under intense pressure to form helium, releasing massive amounts of energy in the form of heat and light. This idea was confirmed by scientists like Hans Bethe, who won a Nobel Prize for explaining nuclear reactions in stars. This incredible process is part of God's amazing design, making the sun a steady source of energy for life on Earth. Second, the radiative zone, the long road for light. Surrounding the core is the radiative zone, which stretches out to about 70% of the sun's radius. In this zone, energy travels extremely slowly, taking years to reach the next layer. That's because energy in the form of photons, light particles, is constantly absorbed and re-emitted by ionized atoms, mostly hydrogen and helium. This process is called radiative transfer. Scientists like Arthur Eddington helped develop models of how energy moves inside stars. The slow journey of energy through this zone reminds us that God's creation is not only powerful, but carefully balanced to support life. Third, sunspots, magnetic storms on the surface of the sun. Sunspots are dark, cooler areas on the sun's surface caused by intense magnetic activity. Although still hot, about 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit, they are much cooler than their surroundings. Some sunspots are as big as Earth or larger and can last for days or even weeks. They appear in cycles, increasing and decreasing about every 11 years. Galileo Galilei was one of the first to observe sunspots through a telescope in the early 1600s. This challenged the false belief that the heavens were unchanging. Only God is unchanging and His Word. Sunspots are a fascinating example of how magnetic energy affects the movement of matter in the sun, showing the complexity and creativity of God's ingenious design. Fourth, the photosphere, the sun's shining surface. The photosphere is part of the sun that we can see with our eyes, with proper protection. It's about 300 miles thick and has a temperature of about 10,000 degrees. This layer gives off most of the visible light we see from Earth. It's made up of plasma, a special state of matter where atoms are torn into ions and electrons. The photosphere constantly boils with movement called convection, like a lava lamp. In convection, the least dense fluids buoyantly rise because they are so hot that they have expanded apart from each other, making them less dense, like a marshmallow. And gravity pulls harder on the cooler, denser fluids, causing them to sink, which pushes the hot fluid up. Joseph von Fraunhofer, a German physicist, discovered lines in the sun's light spectrum that helped scientists learn about the elements present. The beauty and precision of the photosphere reveals the glory of the Creator, who made light to shine upon the earth on day 4 of the creation week. Fifth, we have solar flares, explosions of energy. Solar flares are powerful bursts of energy that shoot out from the sun's surface, often near sunspots. These explosions release electromagnetic radiation, including X-rays and ultraviolet light, in just minutes. Some flares can be stronger than 1 billion nuclear bombs. They send electrically charged particles, like positive protons and negative electrons, flying into space at incredible speeds, millions of miles per hour. Richard Carrington was the first to observe a solar flare in 1859 during a massive solar storm. These energetic events show how magnetic fields and plasma interact, a process designed by God with great power and precision. Sixth, the corona, the sun's glowing halo. The corona, Latin meaning crown, is the sun's outer atmosphere, visible during a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, as a glowing white halo. It extends millions of miles into space and is surprisingly hotter than the surface, over 1 million degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists still don't fully understand why the corona is so hot, but it might be due to magnetic waves and particles. The corona releases solar wind, a constant stream of electrically charged particles that spreads across the solar system. Eugene Parker, a solar physicist, in 1858 predicted the existence of solar wind, and it was later confirmed by NASA's space mission when Mariner 2 flew past Venus. The corona reminds us of the majesty of God, King of creation. Question: what are some parts of the sun? Answer: some parts of the sun are: first is the sun's powerhouse, the core. Second is the long road for light, radiative zone. Third, from magnetic storms, we get sunspots. Fourth, the sun's shining surface, photosphere. Fifth, explosions of energy, solar flares. And sixth, the sun's glowing halo, corona. Listen again to what God says to us in Deuteronomy 4:19, New Century Version. When you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly bodies, don't be tempted to worship and serve them. The Lord your God has given them to all people everywhere. Thank you for listening to the Bible Science for Kids podcast from a uniquely young earth, biblical creationist perspective. I hope to see you next time for Cycle 2, Lesson 10, The Planets. Until next time, this is Randy Osborne, reminding you to keep trusting and serving the Lord.